Hello, AgGrad Nation. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is the new version of AgGrad Live, in which we spotlight a career in agriculture, and not by just talking about it or showing you pictures of it or a job description, but by actually bringing someone to the show who lives this career every single day. And this guest today, I'm particularly excited about because it's somebody that I have known. I was thinking about this right before we started. I think I have known Joel almost as long as I haven't known him, if that makes sense. I think we met like 17 years ago when we were both FFA members going to state president's conference in Washington, D.C. And so we've known each other, like 17 or so years now. So a long time. And I've got to see his career blossom and him become extremely successful in his career as an ag attorney. So I could think of nobody better to bring on AgGrad Live to spotlight the career of an agricultural attorney than Joel McKie. So Joel, let me bring you on here. Okay, you're up. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. That was a very kind introduction. And I guess it has been 17 years. That's hard to fathom, but that's the case.
It is, and I saw in your bio that this is really cool that Governor of Georgia, Sonny Perdue, a name you all listening who might recognize because now he's the Secretary of Agriculture, had appointed you twice, I think, to an Agriculture Education Committee for the state of Georgia. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, that was a neat opportunity to serve a few years ago. We're awfully proud of our secretary having held from the great state of Georgia.
Well, I'm excited to dig into this because I know there's a lot of people, both in college and even out of college, that think, you know what, maybe I should have been a lawyer, and I have a passion for agriculture. So I wanted to bring you on here to tell us what's it really like. So maybe for starters, it will give people some context. Tell us, you are a partner in the firm Hall Booth Smith in Atlanta, and you work on mainly agriculture and environment or energy issues. Is that right?
That's right. So I joined Hall Booth some years ago now. Actually, I'm working on 10. Hall Booth is a law firm based in the Southeast. We're based here in Atlanta. And we have 13 offices, I think, now. I sometimes lose count throughout the Southeast, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And I lead our firm's agricultural practice group. So a significant part of my time has been spent in the agriculture arena, though I do some work for energy clients. So we're about 180 lawyers, and it's really a neat opportunity to practice in what I would consider, by mega firm standards, a medium-sized law firm. Some folks here, 180 lawyers, and certainly think that's large. So, it's a fun challenge most days.
And when people hear ag attorney or ag law, they kind of think maybe a farm dispute, land dispute. Tell us kind of what are some of the core issues that you would work on as an ag attorney.
Right, Tim. I think that term probably means different things to different people, and certainly within the agriculture space. I'll start with this example. Later this month, myself with hundreds of other lawyers will gather in Louisville, Kentucky, for the American Agricultural Law Association. And in that group, you'll have people that are working in small towns in Nebraska and Kansas and Georgia. And then you'll have folks like myself who are in mid to larger law firms. And so depending on who you ask, that may mean different things. For me, I think of my role as being someone that majors in understanding the issues that are unique to agriculture and agribusiness. And then that often implicates a variety of different legal subject matter expertise. That may very well be something that I'm comfortable handling, or it may be something that I have a colleague in my firm who may have that subject matter expertise that I would refer work to. So, for example, I recently had a matter where one of my clients was marketing a specialty crop using a label and design that they had created. That's a situation where I didn't really have what I would say the subject matter expertise to complete a trademark application. In this case, it was a little bit more nuanced than just a mere application. So I would refer that to someone in my setting, which is a little bit larger firm. For others, in a smaller town, I think you would run the gamut. You might have one day be closing a farm lawn, the next day dealing with a contract dispute, whether that be for the delivery of a particular agricultural commodity, or maybe it's a dispute over enforcement of a lease term. To the very next day, if you're in that small town setting, you may very well be working on a divorce case that implicates farm assets. You might be dealing with a tax issue that either involves local property tax matters or focusing on even potentially legal decisions that implicate income tax ramifications. So the depending on what space you're in, where you're at geographically located, both small town versus large town, rural America versus more urban settings. Also, where you're at in the Midwest, California versus Georgia, that may mean different things to different people. So for me particularly, I feel like I get to do as close as you can to a small town practice in a mid to large size law firm.
And then because there's such a variety of different cases you could potentially work on, what would be kind of some examples of your clientele? Are they mainly agribusiness firms or farmers, or do they kind of run the gamut?
Yeah, I'm going to speak on my own experience. I could certainly see this being different depending on those factors I mentioned before. But for me, a large part of what I do is working with folks that are larger agribusinesses. It could be institutional investors in farmland that have direct farming interest. It could be large family farm operations that are buying and acquiring and divesting of agricultural assets. That's a pretty significant part of what I do day in, is the transactional nature of acquisition, divestiture of farming assets, and to a certain extent the contractual nature of longer term relationships, business partnership relationships that some of these larger farmers or institutional agribusinesses may have with folks further up the supply chain. But that doesn't foreclose me from doing some other really neat things. I've one of the areas that we've developed some expertise on is the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act, and that's a pretty esoteric name, but it's basically a statute that allows for people that are supplying produce to have a higher priority from a security standpoint in receivable and proceeds from the sale of that produce than traditional secured creditors. And so that's a very complex federal statute that was enacted in the 1920s, but it's a statute that really protects whether you're a small farmer in South Georgia or the Central Valley of California, or some of the larger agribusinesses that might play in the produce space. And so we spent a fair amount of time in federal court dealing with matters that implicate priority among secured creditors and those that have trust rights under the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act. I probably could name some others, but that might give you a kind of a range of type activities that would potentially hit my plate any day.
Sure. If somebody's asking themselves, like, maybe am I right for this profession? Am I right for becoming an ag attorney? What would you tell them as far as, if you are this way, perhaps being an agricultural attorney might be for you?
Well, I'll say this. I think one of the things about growing up on a farm that really plays nicely, and I know there's probably folks that not necessarily have that background that might be listening today, but I think growing up on a farm laid a solid foundation for me to have the work ethic to do what I do day in and day out. I remember as a kid growing up with hogs, and that was part of my supervised agricultural experience in FFA. And I had the obligation of washing out the hog pens. And some things don't really change. I'm still cleaning up messes most days. But I say that with a little bit of humor and the notion that that work ethic really plays nicely as a skill set or a discipline that would succeed. I look around, there's two, 4 or 5 of us in a 180 law firm that have degrees from the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences at the University of Georgia, and it's that experience coming through that culture that we've had in our college that certainly I think plays well if you choose to go on to a professional career. I think another thing that, as far as skill sets, whether maybe what I just described, that background is not what your experience has been, but I think another skill set that's critically important is attention to detail and discipline. Whether you're on the transactional side or you're a litigator, lots of times transactional documents from litigation, things turn on the smallest of details, and paying great attention to those details and have the discipline to, in my office, I tell the folks that work with me all the time, it's about returning serve promptly. It's about making sure that we figure out what the needs of the client are, the adverse party, opposing counsel on a deal, and figure out what's got to be done, create lists, whatever it is to keep accountability, but make sure you get that done quickly and responsibly. Because I think when you look in my profession, and it's probably true in other customer service representative positions, when you look at whether your clients are happy or not, and ultimately that's what we're about, is trying to satisfy and keep our clients happy. The things that they cite most often when they're dissatisfied with lawyers is whether they return telephone calls promptly, do they return emails promptly, do they act in a professional manner. And those are skill sets that we can begin to hone very early on in our career.
Sorry, getting there. What's one career highlight you can point to that for you really kind of made it all worthwhile? Maybe a moment where you said, this is why I put in all the hours. This is why I do what I do as an attorney.
Right. It's a good question, Tim. Sometimes we get caught in the minutia. It's easy to think about, we've got to get this deal closed, but we're going to work really hard to do it. But there are opportunities in my profession to really stand up for the little guy, or make a contribution to kind of the better interest. If I think back to why I went to law school in the first place, I may not have fulfilled this, but I went to law school thinking that my interest was in agricultural policy, and I wanted to make it easier for folks like my dad and mom who were on the farm to succeed financially. And we could do that in a lot of ways by policy. But I digress a moment. But my point is you can use a law degree to really do good, whether that be policy or there's several organizations out there that really fight for the little guys. And I'll give you this example without trying to avoid giving away any confidences or names. But several years ago, I was approached about a farmer who had lost his farm to a foreclosure action, and what was really, frankly, a very nasty family dispute. It was a lot of it came out of the idea that two brothers had a falling out, but the lender got kind of dragged into it when certain obligations weren't satisfied, at least in the bank's estimation. And so one brother lost a significant amount of money and equity in his farm when the case proceeded to foreclosure. And we did bring a suit on behalf of the plaintiff, and we lost almost every turn till we finally got to the Georgia Court of Appeals, and we succeeded in getting a judgment in favor of the farmer who had lost his equity in his farm. And to see that, have that conversation with him, to know that he had worked 20 years to build that equity, and it had been taken away from him for some circumstances that a lot of which might have been outside of his control. It was a rewarding day to say, hey, this is going to really help this particular farmer make good decisions on a go-forward basis.
That's really cool. So for you, and for those of you who have tuned in here, we do have one question I see people asking, but for you, before we get to that question, I wanted to ask you about, you'd mentioned kind of the work ethic that you needed from being on the farm and the amount of, I mean, it sounds like just in that example you just shared, there were a lot of sort of trials and tribulations along the way. So I'm sure it was a ton of effort and hours that went into that. With all the hours, and I know you work on billable hours, so without all the hours you need to put in, do you feel like in this profession, this is something where you can balance home and work, or is it just by nature of being really demanding work, it's going to require a lot of your time?
Right. It's certainly a demanding occupation, certainly when you elect to work in a larger firm environment. I think many of your listeners probably know that, but for example, we budget as a firm with the expectations that lawyers, especially first out, would bill a certain number of hours. And billing hours is not the same as showing up for work for 8 hours a day. You can't really bill 8 hours in 8 hours unless you're on an airplane traveling to a deposition or trying a case, which is the exception, not the norm. And so it's difficult. I always say, it takes about 10 to 11 hours to bill 8 hours. And if you're expected to bill 8, that's a pretty tough day on any given day, unless you pick some of that up on the weekend, which often is the case. So it is a demanding profession from a standpoint of the only thing we can sell is our time. So to make money, we have to put the time that's required to satisfy both the duty to the client and the obligation to the client, the expectations of the client, but also the amount of time that we kind of plan and budget for. So we'll overlay that with what my wife and I are coming up on our 10th wedding anniversary, and we have a young son. And it's tough. My wife works outside of the home, and when we try to balance dropping off daycare duties, that means I'm a little later getting to work. So that means it's a little longer before I get home. And then your son is in bed close to soon after you arrive at home. So that's a tough challenge. And so some people have different setups. Maybe they have a different expectation of that work-life balance that would involve maybe a more rural setting where it would allow you, because you can be in a sole practitioner, kind of be your own boss. It may allow you to have lunch or breakfast with your kids and then go to work, or during the middle of your day, I should say. But the point is it depends on where you choose to practice. But there should be no doubt that there's a demand on number of hours, and your clients their crisis can come at the most inopportune time. Their deal might need to close. I'll give you this example. We closed a significant deal several years ago, and my wife and I were expecting our son about 7 days after the closing date. And God has a way of working, and my son came 5 days before the closing date. And so my wife was incredibly understanding, but the day she was in labor, I shouldn't say we, I was up to 3 a.m. that morning working on trying to get this deal in a position that I could hand the football over to some of my colleagues to get the deal closed. And then 5 days after, we were part of the group that actually did close the deal on time. But the things happen. You're on the beach taking telephone calls with your client. Those are things that other people in the ag industry have the same realistic, whether you're a farmer dealing with those things, with a calf being born on a Christmas morning. Those are things we all know and deal with, and it's not unique. But just to frame it, you're sure not going to escape those if you choose a legal profession.
Sure. And what action steps would you say, Joel, can someone take if they are in college now, or maybe just out of college, to getting into law school? Is there anything kind of extracurricular wise that they could do to set themselves up for a career as an attorney?
Right. Well, admissions into law school can obviously be very competitive, and it involves and most law schools still taking the LSAT, though there's been a trend toward using the GRE. But obviously doing well in the LSATs, finding the time to do either prep course or studying, that's hugely important, as I understand it, to success in law school, or getting into law school, I should say. I think it's equal. The other metric that I understand law schools continue to heavily rely upon is undergraduate GPAs, and so succeeding and doing well, that probably goes without saying. Is certainly a measuring stick to getting into law school. I think the things beyond those two performance related metrics is getting good work experiences. It's not often that you can get an opportunity to work for a law firm as an undergraduate, but there may be opportunities to be involved in policy or government affairs that relate to some of that basic skill set. But what you're trying to do is get your own exposure, make sure and confirm that you want to spend 3 years in a pretty arduous, curriculum in law school, and then the career afterwards. That work experience gives you that exposure to some of those things, but it also allows you to build good reputations for people that can write you a letter of references and help you in the application process. So I think if that would be the kind of the three-legged stool of how I think I would approach it.
Very cool. One more question before we let you get back to your work and or family or whatever you have going on. But question from the comments: what type of case interests you the most?
Right. If I was being candid, this is not always the case I get to work on the most. But honest to goodness, the cases that I feel the best about are the ones where one or two things are occurring. I'm in the weeds with a client trying to figure out a strategy for a deal, or that might be an acquisition divestiture deal, or it could be a transaction involving supply chain type issues. But where I'm really in the weeds with the client, applying my legal knowledge to help them figure out what risk they can evaluate price risk on a commodity. They can evaluate price risk on land. But what I'm trying to help them do is apply some standardization to the risk for environmental legal risk or non-payment creditworthiness evaluation to that, and apply that to help them make the right business decision in that setting. So it's more applying my legal background, my understanding of agriculture to make good business decisions. Separate and apart from that, if I was thinking about litigation, I think the case that I just explained about the foreclosure, or there's a lot of places where I think farmers, in fact, don't get a square deal. They don't get the right deal. And sometimes they know about it, sometimes they don't. Farmers are not always litigious, and so they're a little bit sometimes reluctant to get into a big battle with anyone, unless people that they perceived as having a superior place of bargaining power. I wouldn't want to take all those cases on, but there are certainly ones where I feel like folks might have not got the right end of the stick I always feel good if I feel like I help a farmer feed his family or put a little bit away in the bank to help him have a better year in the future. So those opportunities, I can't take every one of those that come in, but certainly when they do happen, they're a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, you may remember this. I certainly remember. Joel and I were national FFA officers together, and we visited Washington, D.C. And I remember sitting in an attorney's office in D.C. that he took on the railroads. And I don't know, something you just said reminded me of kind of like little guy versus the big guy. I don't know. It just kind of reminded me of that. But there is one more question that came in from someone in the group. Sarah Elizabeth says, sorry if you already said it, but how did you decide to become an attorney?
Sure. First of all, let me address that. I do very much remember that meeting in D.C. and I think we got Gun Steel, and what was the name of that book? Gun Steel, and I think you got through the book. I don't know that I ever got all the way through the book, but it was. You're right. There is some parallels there. Sarah, to your question, I honest to goodness, I graduated from the University of Georgia with an agribusiness degree, and so I should give a shout out to the University of Georgia if I haven't done that already 3 times. I thought I wanted to either be a banker or I wanted to be an attorney, and the idea with an attorney was I was going to go to DC and help shape farm policy. I thought there was a lot of ways that we could do things to make it easier for farmers to succeed. And in the course of that, kind of that movement, I had a little bit of a change of heart as to how I was going to use my law degree. I feel like I'm in a good place to do some of those same desired goals, which is to help farmers. But at the same rate, we still get an opportunity from time to time to impact policy that impacts farmers. So that's how it all got started. And sometimes life has a way of moving you away from that initial view, but we still strive to get back to that center and that core when we can.
Great. Joel, I really can't thank you enough. I know it's always busy for you, and I really appreciate you sharing kind of your daily life with the folks in the AgGrad Nation. So I think a lot of people are going to get extreme value out of this, and maybe even check out Georgia for law school. We'll see how the football season turns out, but it's certainly looking good right now, as far as I can tell. If you're tuning in and you're interested in careers in being an ag attorney or other careers in agriculture, please head over to jobs.aggrad.com and create a profile, and we'd be happy to keep in touch and keep you posted on other career spotlights like this and any openings that come across our desk. So, Joel, thank you again.
Thanks, Tim. Very much enjoyed being with you.